Are you ready to revolutionize your relationship with money? Welcome to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with the Frugal Physician, where Dr. Disha Spath will be your companion on this exciting financial adventure. Get ready to conquer debt, build wealth, and embrace a mindful spending lifestyle that will empower you to live life on your own terms.
Pearson Ravitz' story begins with Dr. Stephanie Pearson, a passionate OB-GYN at the height of her career. But then, a shoulder injury struck during a precipitous delivery. Her dreams were shattered, leaving her unable to practice medicine. Determined to make a difference, Stephanie became an advocate for her peers, guiding them through the complex disability process. Alongside insurance expert Scott Ravitz, Stephanie founded Pearson Ravitz, a company determined to approach insurance differently. Together, they set their mission to educate and empower physicians to protect their most valuable asset, their income, and the most important people in their life, their family. Today, Pearson Ravitz serves the medical community in all 50 states. At Pearson Ravitz, they understand the unique concerns of physicians. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Ravitz builds human connections before they create quotes. Life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness or injury could leave you and your family in a devastating financial situation. But with a little planning and guidance, you can prepare for every possibility. Visit PearsonRavitz.com to schedule your consultation with a Pearson Ravitz advisor. Welcome back to another episode of Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician. Today, we've got a treat for you. Dr. Jimmy Turner is joining us again. For those who might not know him, Jimmy is a practicing academic anesthesiologist, the mastermind behind the physician Philosopher and Money Meets Medicine, host of Money Meets Medicine podcast, and the author of the Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance. His biggest passion? Helping doctors achieve financial freedom so that they can practice medicine on their own terms. Let's dive in and get this financial fiesta started. Hey, Jimmy, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back on. Super excited.
I'm really thankful to have you here. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into your journey and into what made you decide to write about money. You initially started as the physician philosopher, and now you're at Money Meets Medicine. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about why philosophy and money.
Yeah, really good question. So I guess the name of the physician philosopher originally, I was a philosophy major in college, as a double major in philosophy and chemistry before going into medicine. And I have always really enjoyed kind of critical thinking, problem solving, abstract ideas. My superpower has always been taking complicated situations and making them simple. The seeds for the financial part got planted actually early in my financial journey, both in my fourth year as a medical student. The first one was not the greatest experience, but my wife and I, we had our first kid, Grace, who's 13 now, which is insane. And so when we had her, we felt like #adulting, like we should get term life insurance to make sure that if either of us died, the other person and our kid would be taken care of. I had no idea who to approach for that, but one of the brothers of a medical school classmate happened to be able to sell insurance. Approached them, didn't know anything about money at this point, like absolutely nothing. I can talk about a lot of my bad financial habits from back then. So I ended up getting talked into applying for disability insurance as a fourth year student with no income. So I didn't even have any income to protect. I shouldn't have been sold the product anyway. But long story short, I have an essential trimmer, take propranolol for that. I was going into a procedural specialty. And so I just got outright denied. And at the time, it didn't seem like a huge deal because I didn't know anything about it back then. But if I had waited a year, there was something called the guaranteed standard issue policy, which is a type of disability policy that doesn't look into your medical history. So they wouldn't have cared about my trimmer. I would have been able to get disability insurance. One stipulation, which is that you can't have been denied or disabled. And so since I got denied because an insurance agent was trying to earn commission off of me, to this day, I can't get disability insurance. That was like my first little seed that was planted. It ended up being a much bigger seed than I realized. And the second one was actually not 12 months later. My med school, really well-meaning, brought in this firm to talk to us about personal finance, to try to teach us about investing and student loans. It felt really slimy at the time. Like they're taking email addresses and names. I didn't really know anything, but I just didn't trust it. And like not 3 years into my residency, did the CEO of the firm that was talking to us that day get thrown in jail for fraud. I had this massive distrust of the financial industry from a pretty early stage in medicine. And that got borne out. The further I got along, I was like, man, I just don't feel like I can trust anybody. And so I started learning on my own. I love teaching, making those complicated things simple. And so my students, my residents, my colleagues started asking me to teach them about personal finance as I started learning more and more. And so, I saw a need. I started the Physician Philosopher as a blog originally and wrote 3 posts a week for 2 to 3 years. And really have always combined personal finance with wellness just because I feel like they're so intrinsically linked, in terms of people's ability to practice medicine on their terms. And so I've always been on that journey, ended up starting Money Meets Medicine, the podcast. And it's all kind of grown from there. And it's been a really fun journey the last 7 years.
And it's really been fun to watch your journey and how you've evolved. You mentioned some of the mistakes that you made. Take us back to that and tell us a little bit about the wrong moves that you might have made in the past.
So definitely the biggest one was my disability insurance situation. And the reason why was because I didn't know anything. I didn't understand that insurance agents are paid based on commission. Naturally, that places there to be an incentive to sell you a product, even if it's not necessarily something that you need. And this is true for, disability insurance. It's true for life insurance. That's why whole life insurance products get really put in front of doctors so often in this space. And people don't realize the extent of that commission. I mean, it's 50 to 100% of the premium you pay. If you're buying a $20,000 whole life insurance product, that agent's going to make $10,000 to $20,000 off of that one person that year. You don't have to sell too many of those policies to start making physician income. If I'd known what the conflict was back then, that really would have saved me from my mistake and given me a different perspective with which to make that decision. I took out as much debt as I possibly could in med school, even though I had a full ride from a tuition standpoint. I took out all of the cost of living. I was married. My wife was a teacher. We didn't have to live on that money, but I did it anyway. All of my student loan debt, the $200,000 I ended up having to pay off, came from living expenses. I didn't live, as you would say, frugally. Didn't know to even consider that back then. So I made lots of mistakes with that. I made the mistake with disability insurance. I also spent every dime of the GI Bill that I got because my dad was in the military in college instead of saving any of it because I didn't know anything about it back then either. And so all that said, I made tons of mistakes. I really learned from all of them and love educating people about them. But even with all those mistakes, we're still in a really good spot. So you can make mistakes financially and still recover from them. So I like to be an example of how not to do it, but also some hope that if you have done the things that I've done, you too can succeed.
Yeah, that's the good thing about being a doctor is that when you have a high income and are willing to work, you can turn around financial mistakes relatively quickly. And if you're able to frugal down and save, aggressively, then that progress can be quite rapid. What are some key principles that you believe should be taught to medical students and residents about money that were not taught to you?
Yeah, so I think that for medical school, the way that I always kind of break this up, if I could design like a perfect curriculum through medical training, being in academics, medical school would be about personal finance because there's some things that apply to everybody. 80% of students have student loans. It's an area that's ripe with the opportunity to make a very large 6-figure mistake. They need to learn about asset protection. They need to learn about investing. But honestly, at that stage, they don't really have a ton of money, most of them, to invest. So they want to learn about it from a financial literacy standpoint, but they don't really want to learn about it from an application standpoint quite yet. And so that kind of transitions into residency, but residency is very specific, right? So you and I practice different specialties. So what you need to know about billing for yours and what I need to know about billing for mine are fundamentally different. And I think that business aspect of medicine is something that should probably be taught more into, those residency or fellowship years if you extend your training.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, there's so much about how money in our own field works that doesn't get taught to us that we have to sort of learn along the way through the school of hard knocks, and doesn't need to be that opaque.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And student loans is a great example of that, right? So I think that it can be seen as a really complicated area of personal finance, and it is opaque, right? And there's always constant changes that are happening. So for example, public service loan forgiveness gets a lot of airtime, but long-term forgiveness that you get through, nowadays SAVE and that new IBR program doesn't get spoken about as much. And it's really interesting that for a lot of doctors listening to the show that go into a private practice or non-501c3 situation that they're like, oh, I guess I have to just pay off my debt. And there's a bunch of websites that are telling me I should refinance my student loans that they get a kickback from. And they don't realize that long-term forgiveness is still available. And at least from a mathematical standpoint, there are a lot of doctors who would actually benefit from that long-term forgiveness, even though that forgiveness at the end is taxable. Public service loan forgiveness. One of the principles I would teach my students, and I do teach my students, is know what your options are. That's half the game. You don't need to know about the nitty-gritty inner details unless you want to. I think that's great if you do, but you should at least know what are my options, right? It's not just PSLF or pay it back yourself. There is a third option available that doesn't get spoken about as much because maybe it's more complicated or it's just so far away. I'm not really sure. You need to know the options.
So speaking of, not talking about things, I have found that in medicine, it's almost in general society, it's kind of uncouth to talk about money and investing, but especially in medical society. And it's almost frowned upon when you do talk about money on rounds, for example. Why do you think that is?
I think it's an uncomfortable topic. And the reason why is because the vast majority of physicians don't know much about personal finance. I think it's a little embarrassing to them when you start having conversations and they realize how little they know. It's hard because the people that are creating the environments in which we learn just by statistics typically don't know anything about money. And so they don't want to have other people talk to their students about money. And so it's just like this cycle that exists where it doesn't really have a way to get out. You can't really break that cycle because the people that make the decisions about whether you can even teach these topics or talk about them to make them less taboo are typically the ones that find it the most taboo. I think it's hard because you have to kind of break through that cycle in order to have these conversations. But it's also, the sort of thing where I think in medicine, I know this is true from a layperson's perspective because I've gotten flack for this online before. Online keyboard warriors are the best. And they basically say, oh, well, if you're not in medicine for altruistic reasons, then you are not a good doctor. And their definition of that involves anything involving money, right? So if you're talking about money and you're a physician, that means you're a bad doctor because you're not in it for the good of other people. Because clearly you're speaking about money. You must care a lot about it. It's a false dichotomy that people draw. You can care about personal finance and financial freedom while also caring very deeply about the patients that you take care of and, the medicine that you provide. In our world, medicine, the altruism of it, and money seem to be at odds for some people. And I think that prevents discussion too.
I totally agree. I mean, doctors in general get a lot of hate because we have a big paycheck. And I feel like doctors that drive the super nice cars or kind of flaunt their money get additional hate, especially from the keyboard warriors, just the general media. But I feel like knowing the finances, not only our personal finance, but also medicine, how much something costs when you're ordering it is an essential part of taking care of the patient.
Yeah, I think that's really, really challenging. I do agree, but I'll say as an anesthesiologist, and I'm always embarrassed when a patient asks me this, right? So what I do for living in medicine is regional anesthesia. So the way I explain it to people is I can block any part of your body, make it numb below your clavicles. You can avoid general anesthesia and you wake up and you don't hurt and people love it. But occasionally I'll have a patient ask me like, hey, is this included? Will this be covered by my insurance? And I honestly have no idea, right? The billing in our department is done by the billers. The company that you might be using is different for everybody. And the kind of plan that you're on at that company that could be different for anybody. Like there's so many variables for the kind of insurance you might have that may or may not cover X, Y, and Z. I don't even know how to answer the question. And speaking of opaque from earlier, like that really bothers me about medicine that I don't know. I couldn't even tell you the out-of-pocket cost for me doing a thoracic epidural for somebody who has a bunch of broken ribs. I don't know. I just don't know. And I think that's a huge disservice, to be honest with you, to, the patients that I serve, but it is opaque. And I don't know that there's even any way for me to know that information. And even when I've asked, the answer is so complicated that it wouldn't be something I could explain to a patient.
That is the challenge of being in a third-party payer system where you have no control over the final bill that actually does get sent to the patient. It has so much to do with the contract that they have with their insurance company. And at least the government has made the surprise bill of, if the physician is out of network with the insurance company, that the patient doesn't have to pay for it out of pocket. That was happening a lot in hospitals where the hospital was in the insurance network, but the physician was not for some reason or another.
Yeah. And I know that particularly hit anesthesia and EM and, radiology practices that weren't, employed by the hospital. It's been interesting working in that environment. Fortunately, I work in academics, so it didn't impact, our department at all. But I know for a lot of private practice friends, it did.
I think we're making strides towards greater price transparency in healthcare, and that's awesome. I think we are also making strides in greater money transparency in the physician world.
Forget the burdens of tenants and toilets. Equity Multiple simplifies your investment journey, letting you invest passively in vetted, professionally managed commercial real estate. Only 5% of reviewed investments reach Equity Multiple's platform. with our asset management working on each from funding through exit to maximize your returns. Whether you're on the couch in your exec chair or the backseat of a ride share, Equity Multiple brings cash-flowing real estate investments straight to your fingertips. All investments involve risk. Visit equitymultiple.com to learn more.
In your experience, do you feel like physician financial literacy and just transparency in talking about money is getting better or worse?
Yeah, no, I really do. I've got experiences in two different areas. One is in my personal experience at Wake, where I'm in academics and I teach students and residents, and I don't have a shift where a financial topic doesn't get brought up to me. It doesn't happen. And so, I'll be on second shift. And the other day, one of our plastics residents was like, hey, you teach about personal finance, right? And I was like, I do. And he's like, can you come give us a grand rounds? And I was like, that would be great. And so, that on a personal experience in life, like in real life outside of, podcasts and blogs and, that sort of thing, I think that that's definitely happened in, the experience that I've had. And then online, I think it is true, as well. There's been obviously a proliferation of vlogs and podcasts and just really great content that's out there, books, and the opportunity to learn about this stuff is readily accessible for people. I think it's really increased in at least the 7 years that I've been involved in this space. It's been really exciting to see that people are more interested, people are more willing to talk about it openly, and some walls have kind of been brought down to foster some of those conversations.
Well, and you're doing your part in spreading the financial literacy, and you've recently put out a course that is excellent, I think. Can you tell us about your course and exactly what it includes?
Yeah. So medical degree financial university is for basically any doctor. And for me, a lot of my slant goes towards trainees and those that are, just recently graduated. So I'd say, anybody in residency fellowship or, early careers out as an attending. And the reason why is because that's when you need to build your financial foundation. Of course, you can always do it later, but the earlier you do it, the better. Time is really important when it comes to financial topics. I've always focused on financial literacy, whether that's my book, which I give away for free at this point, the podcast, blogs, that sort of thing. It's all free content to consume. But if you want to learn more and apply things specifically to your situation, you can take that financial literacy and use some of those tools inside of MDFU and allow you to do that. Something that I've become really passionate about is making student loan information affordable. The average student loan consult now costs like $600 or $700 for most places. And so for me, I know that paying $600 out of pocket would have been extremely expensive for me as a resident. I don't even know that. Maybe my emergency fund was like $500 to $1,000 because I didn't know anything about money back then. And honestly, $1,000 as a resident is a lot of money. So yeah, as part of MDFU, not only do you get the financial literacy piece, but you also get a student loan consult each year for those that have student loans. And it makes it accessible and affordable for them at less than half the cost of what a normal student loan consult would cost. And so that is something that I'm super excited about and has been there for a little while. And I've seen people really benefit from it.
Yeah, that's invaluable. How much does your course cost?
Yeah, so it's $49 a month, or if you pay annually, it's $299. So you save 50% of the cost.
I understand you have certified as a student loan advisor. Is that correct?
Yep. So working towards that right now. I finished all the course material. All I have to technically do is finish that last exam.
Tell us a little bit about that process. How much study is involved and how are you going to get the certification?
Yeah. So the CSLP, the Certified Student Loan Professional, it used to be called CSLA. It's something that is a designation people can get. You have to have a certain designation. So you need to be a financial advisor, an insurance agent, something like that to be able to claim the designation. It involves basically 4 blocks of course material that are several hours. They basically teach you anything from the basics of student loans to case studies and examples of it, and introduces you to specific software that allows you to crunch the numbers, because that's one of the hardest parts about it is taking someone's situation and then showing them like, this is what it would be in saving for a valuable education and save, or new IBR. This is what it would be if you sought public service loan forgiveness versus long-term forgiveness or paying it off yourself. It allows you to kind of crunch and analyze the data for somebody and present it in a way that's helpful for them. The thing that's interesting about student loans is that everybody's goal is different. So for some people, they may come in and be like, hey, my goal is to minimize my monthly payment, right? Some people might say, hey, my overall goal is to pay the least amount overall, over the next 7 years. But that goal is going to shape, obviously, the direction that you go. Lots of didactic material, lots of quizzes and tests. It's a pretty thorough process.
Good. I'm glad to hear that because, we want the people giving people advice to be certified and have some sort of accountability. Or do you have to list yourself on a federal website and that kind of thing?
It's interesting because if you look up a CSLP designation, you can look that up by the group that offers that and they will list it there. It's not like you have to register as like an investment advisor would for, the SEC or for FINRA and have an ID number, that sort of thing. I would say it's a little bit less registered, or what's the word I'm looking for here? A little less bureaucracy or
federally regulated.
Federally regulated. Yeah. And it's an interesting thing too, because student loans is complicated, but at the same time, it's not something that you couldn't do by yourself if you wanted to. I always tell people like, look, if you want to learn enough about money to be able to do things yourself, I think that that's fantastic. Like I would encourage as many physicians listening to this to do that as possible. However, it's a little naive to think that a lot of doctors are going to do that. Most doctors are like, hey, I'm insanely busy and I have a family and I'm doing all of these other things. I would just like for somebody to take a look at my situation and help me figure out what is the best thing to do. Present the information so that I can decide.
And there's nothing wrong with that, because the people that are the DIY investors want to learn all the ins and outs of finance. In medicine, it's a very small percentage. And even if we want to learn it, we often don't have enough time to do it. I got to say, I've been doing this for 5 years and I'm still learning. There's so many little things that I still need to continue to learn and explore. And there will never be a point where I'll feel like I know it all. It's an ever-changing field, especially with changing guidelines, changing payment plans. So investing in someone who is up to date on all the information and can crunch the numbers for you, which is often the hardest part for someone who's not into numbers, is humongous. Are you able to work in like state stipulations into your projections for student loans?
Yeah. So, if you're married and, you live in a community property state, right. Obviously that impacts the way that you make your payments. The math is calculated differently. So I basically take all the information and crunch it into multiple scenarios. So if you're married, to married filing jointly and married filing separately, and show the math for both of those and provide a document or a plan that basically says, hey, here's all of the information. Here's the summary at the top in terms of what we decided that you should do. But here's all the information if you want it. And the numbers are crunched both ways based on their situation. If you live in the 40 states that aren't community property, then it's crunched differently than if you are.
Could you just give us a little snippet summary of why that's important, the community property states and married filing separately?
Yeah. So in the 40 states that aren't community property states, when you file your taxes separately, it basically excludes your spouse's entire income. If you make 300, they make 100, then, you exclude theirs, you would make $300,000. That's what would be included on your filing separate, AGI. If you lived in a community property state, what they do is they say, hey, well, everything's kind of combined. So even if you file separately, you make 300, they make 100. Well, combined, you make $400,000. And so if you filed separately, they'd say you each get 2. And so in a community property state, it would actually drive down your income from a student loan standpoint, which is based on your adjusted gross income. So in a non-community property state in that situation, it would be $300,000 and that would determine your payment. If you live in a community property state, it would only be $200. Your payment would be lower. And so that kind of brings in different scenarios where it may be beneficial or not to file separately, depending on which state you live in.
Just to remind our listeners, your income-driven repayment plans, your payment is based on your modified adjusted income. The lower your adjusted gross income is, the lower your payment is, and therefore the higher the amount that is forgiven at the end of your forgiveness period.
It's important to remember because it impacts the way you file if you're married. But, a lot of people, right, listen to Financial Literacy show. And if you invest your money pre-tax, that's one of the things that lowers your AGI. Some people will be like, oh yeah, if you're a resident, you should, if you have extra money, invest in Roth because of taxes, and your taxes are going to be lower now than they will be when you're in retirement. It's like, well, that's true. But if you have student loans and you invest pre-tax, that'll also drive down your student loan payment, assuming it's not zero. And that can actually be really beneficial too. So if you understand what the levers are, it becomes a little more understandable in terms of decisions you can make for your student loan situation.
What's one thing that if you could tell a resident that was, clueless to personal finance, if there's one thing you could tell them, what would it be?
Probably the most important thing you could tell somebody is that not to put it off, right? In terms of learning about this stuff, because arguably the most important thing, at least when it comes to investing, is time in the market. And getting started early is fundamentally important when it comes to building wealth and your ability to get to financial independence. And given that I'm a huge proponent of people being able to practice because they want to and not because they have to, you need to be able to practice medicine on your terms. The earlier you start, the sooner you will get to that goal. Don't put it off. It doesn't take a ton of time to read a book or to, listen to this show on your commute to work once a week. That's not a huge commitment of your time. And a lot of those things can be done while you're doing other things like laundry or dishes or working out or commuting, whatever you might be doing. Don't put it on the back burner. I know this doesn't seem super important right now, but decisions that you're making right now really do impact your future. For me, it would have allowed me to get disability insurance if I'd learned earlier. It would have allowed me to not have $200,000 in student loans I had to pay off in my first couple years out. And had I learned about this earlier, it would have saved me a lot of grief. And the other thing too is that if you can learn medicine, you can learn money, right? This isn't that complicated. I know it seems so foreign and it seems really tough when you start, but after you kind of, wade into the waters a little bit, it really isn't as hard as you think that it is. That oftentimes will prevent people from starting their journey. They're like, it's just so complicated. I don't even know where to start. Just get started.
For the value of being able to practice on your own terms, as a medical student, I may not have understood that concept. How has being able to practice on your own terms because you want to rather than you have to made a difference in your life?
The most important thing in my life is my family. We saved a lot of money in my first few years training, and now I practice medicine 40 weeks of the year. I practice 2 to 3 days a week. I coach my kids' baseball team. I'm there for, my little girls' every soccer game. I'm heavily involved in my children's lives. And that would not have been possible if I was enslaved to my paycheck. That allowed me the freedom to be able to not have to choose between being a good dad and being a good doctor. I didn't want to have to choose those two things. I wanted to be good at both of them. That even 7 years in my career has been possible because of steps that we made financially.
And that's so super important to be able to prioritize the things that you want to prioritize while practicing medicine alongside and doing a good job at both. Well, Dr. Turner, thank you so much for coming on to our podcast today and again, sharing your wisdom. And listeners will be sharing the link to his course that will make it super easy for you to learn about personal finance and get a student loan consultation from Dr. Turner's team. Super excited about this, and I heartily believe in your mission. Thank you again for everything that you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure as always.
All right, frugal friends, that's a wrap for today's episode. Huge thanks to Jimmy for coming back to discuss achieving financial independence and practicing medicine on our own terms. If you loved what you heard, don't forget to check out the Money Meets Medicine podcast and snag a copy of his book, The Physician-Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance. That link is in the show notes. And here's something special for you. We're running a giveaway. Sign up for Jimmy's course on financial independence using our special link, also in the show notes, and send a screenshot to me via email at thefrugalphysician@gmail.com, and we'll send you a free copy of Morgan Housel's blockbuster bestseller on personal finance and psychology, The Psychology of Money. Remember, the road to financial freedom is a marathon, not a sprint. Keep hustling, keep saving, keep dreaming big, and keep staying frugal, y'all. Catch you in the next episode. Now, a final word from our sponsor. At Pearson Rabbits, they understand that life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness, injury, or catastrophic event could put you and your family in a devastating financial situation. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Rabbits builds human connections before they create quotes. Visit www.pearsonrabbits.com today and embark on your journey to safeguarding your future.
The content shared on this podcast should not be taken as individualized financial advice. We are here to share our knowledge and experiences, but it is crucial to consult with professionals such as accountants, financial advisors, or attorneys who can provide personalized guidance based on your specific needs.